Couldn't have made it without you.
I need more time. I'm not ready.
Hello, here's my build for Twisting Blades Poison, without using traps, which I felt were really clunky when I tried it in the beta, so I wanted to make a highly mobile build without them. And instead I use the ultimate that causes shadow clones to also strike, and it seems to work quite well, although the nerf hit it pretty hard. You now need to be able to kind of tank and spam a bit more to get your cooldowns up, but it still works. It's still top tier for single target damage, or I imagine if there is some group meta where you need a boss killer, it's absolute top tier for Lilith damage or elite damage. Let's start with the skills. We use Puncture as a builder. And we actually use the builder, it's not just there as a decoration. Between inner energy procs, we need to spam it a bit, and with very high attack speed, I actually use two aspects that causes additional attack speed, both the unique dagger and the one that causes crits from core skills to give attack speed. So it has the combination of giving slow and energy and vulnerability. So it actually builds energy quite fast when you have really high attack speed, because these 3 blades can shotgun, so it seems you build 6 per hit. And when you hit really fast, it actually fills up the bar in not that many seconds. And when the inner energy thing was nerfed, you actually need to build a little bit of energy between rounds, even on perfect single target. So obviously Twisting Blades as a core skill doesn't need much of an explanation. You can both spam it in melee, and it seems it counts as if the blades return to you and everything will just be hit regardless, or build up a few and then dash through enemies and get the high damage on the other side. Cooldown reduction was heavily nerfed, which again means you need to spam quite a bit more of it to get all your cooldowns up, but it still works, though barely. And cooldown reduction is absolutely mandatory, and even when you have maxed cooldown reduction on your amulet and helmet, it's borderline if you can get things up. I feel that they over-nerfed it a bit now. I don't know if they realize when you take it from like 0.2 to 0.1, it's a 50% nerf, but yeah, it still works, so it's not terrible. We use damage reduction and siphoning strikes. Siphoning strikes heals, and that's a very good combination with the legs temerity. As you can see, it adds a big shield every time you go above full life, and it actually works on the heal proc, so on single target you get it all the time. It also works on potions, so you can pre-pot and have the barrier up before every pack if you have potion. And yeah, really good passive. I use concealment on clear for an extra unstoppable and energy and a guaranteed crit. And since when clearing, you might not spam that many Twisted Blades. So getting a guaranteed crit on the first one is actually a decent damage increase. And another interaction you can do is start at a very dangerous pack, hit as many blades as you can, use concealment, and then completely safely just run through the enemies with increased attack speed to the other side, and the blades will follow you shortly after. It's safer than anything else. But usually I just dash, unless I'm really, really scared of the pack on like high maps. I have so far only cleared about level 110 mobs, but I didn't get any higher keys. It should be able to do a bit higher, but it's not a strong build for pushing. It's possibly one of the best speed farming builds still, but pushing is like, it's average at best, I'd say. Poison imbuement, and we use an aspect that causes it to have no cooldown when you stand in your procced poison pools. I'll go through the gear in a little bit. This one seems much stronger than the option, which is on lucky hit. And since the lucky hit is something like, this is gonna be what, 10% chance to do double damage, while here we have 75% increased damage, multiplicative, on crits. So once you start getting a bit of crit, this must be best option. We have Shadow Clone as the ultimate. And we again use the aspect that causes your shadow clones to mimic your imbuements. So every strike from your clones will also mimic the poison imbuement for high damage. And I used the close quarters combat, because attack speed is almost a damage multiplier. And this gives as well a big damage bonus. I think many of the others are a bit lackluster. Momentum is decent if combined with some items, but I don't really have room. And victimized looks decent, but when you try it you don't even notice it, because it's like unlucky hit has a chance, so it happens only occasionally for very little damage. So I was very not impressed. But since we actually use the builder, this is very solid, and even when you have energy you have to remember to weave in a builder, and otherwise it's like, you don't even need to think about it. So I've linked the build below. There's nothing to explain really about passives. Invest quite heavily in lucky hit, since Twisting Blades have high lucky hit and hit many times. This helps keep the energy sustained, and this increases, the more energy you have, the more energy you spend, and it kind of snowballs into increasing your lucky hit chance further. So let's look at the gear. On a helm, if you don't happen to have the Harlequin crest, you want to still replicate a similar helmet. So life, cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction is priority 1, and priority 2 is ranks of poison imbuement. The helm I have here is really decent. Could have had a, I don't know, stats instead of resist maybe, but it's pretty much as good as it gets. Chest, bunch of damage reductions. As you can see here, you can get it both from close enemies, enemies that are poisoned, which will be also close enemies, and distant enemies. I suppose distance enemies could be something else, but it's also one of the strongest. And life should be mandatory on a chest. For gloves, you can either use rare gloves with excellent stats, like this one. Twisting Blades ranks, critical strike chance, attack speed, and primary resource or heal on lucky hit. All good options. But I also mainly used Grasp of Shadow, which procs clones on vulnerable enemies, and I've been trying a bit on and off with my like super good gloves compared to these, and I very hard time telling a difference. So both work, and these are a pretty common drop, so you should get them before long. Legs, temerity, as soon as you can get it, otherwise just random defensive stats, life and so on. I mentioned it before. Temerity is insanely strong because you can pre-pot to proc this shield. You can see, I can't pot in town, but you can pre-pot before you hit the pack. You can just spam pots due to the power I use on the helm. That causes lucky hits, which we again have invested in to spawn pots. So on boss fights, and there's usually pots lying everywhere, you can just use them without caring too much. The proc from the passive that heals also procs it, even if it's just, you know, few hundred hit points over max, you get the shield. Boots, either use one with very good like resource reduction, movement speed and so on, but this is a damage multiplier, so this is probably best, but both work really well. It's not a big deal. It's a small damage multiplier traded against a small resource reduction, so it's a bit whatever. Ranged weapon. I put twisting blades here, and you should put your strongest aspect on the 200 weapon because it increases the aspect by 100%. And I'm not completely sure that twisting blades is best, but it probably is. This is like another candidate. The imbuement potency against vulnerable might actually be stronger, but it's so hard to calculate when there's no damage meter or anything. I don't really know exactly how much damage the blades deal and how much poison deals and so on. So this should probably be on the necklace, and I have the attack speed on the necklace, but again, this is like also really good because attack speed is almost a multiplier. So these could go on either slot, but I think this is correct, and these should be swapped. But it's probably a marginal increase. Weapons should have critical strike damage, close enemies, vulnerable damage, and you can also have critical strike damage with imbued skills. It used to be so much more reliable to always have the imbue up. Now I would say that crit damage on imbued falls down a bit, and it's better to have something else, but it's still good. Ultimate skill damage is also good. Again, it has also fallen off because of the CDR nerf. You could always have the Shadow Clone up almost, so yeah. Again, same priorities. I think 100 and 200 weapons have the same stats. Crit damage, crit with imbued. Damage over time is not good, but it's what I have is the highest damage weapon I ever found. And like all the stats are good, so damage over time could have been close damage, for example, and then it would have been perfect, but still really good. And just get 2 of these weapons. Use swords instead of daggers. I have more damage and a better implicit, the critical strike damage. I use this dagger for more attack speed. It's not important to have. You can instead just have another aspect, but it's really good to get extra attack speed, so I think this slightly better than edgemaster, because after they nerfed inner sight, you won't always have full energy. So edgemaster wouldn't be completely procced all the time, but edgemaster is still really good, so yeah, both work. And I happen to get a really high one, so I went with this. priority for critical strike, crit damage, life or energy, and vulnerable damage. Vulnerable damage becomes its own multiplier, apparently, from people who have tested it, while every other damage increase, close enemies, far enemies, damage over time, all of those are just additive in a big pool of damage. But vulnerable damage is in a league of its own. And the aspect here is extremely important. It enables the whole build to work almost, because shadow clones also mimic your imbuements, and these two together allows you to always have imbuements when you proc a poison pool. As long as you stand in it, you have eternal poison imbuement. So these are really important, while many others here are just damage. But these two are build enabling. Poison imbuement and shadow clones. Necklace, very important to have cooldown reduction and cost reduction. Movement speed is the third priority if you can have it, and the fourth can be almost anything. I have a extremely good necklace here. One of my best items, I think, and damage reduction is good. Plenty of options though, and getting one with all 4 stats correct is pretty insane. For gems, I've used diamonds in the jewelry, and this is something you can swap. So if you farm, say, blind burrows, which is one of the best dungeons to level in, you could put poison gems in all of these and just swap them out, but overall I guess diamonds are best. I picked rubies in all armor parts to synergize with temerity and the percentage-based procs from the skill tree, and damage over time in weapons, because they seem to give a bit more than others, although maybe I should change to critical strike damage on vulnerable when now that crit is actually up a bit. So both of those work. I think with perfect crit rolls, crit damage will start to outscale damage over time, but I always went damage over time earlier and just stuck with it. Here's my Paragon board. It's a board I theory crafted before release, and I never had access to the endgame closed beta, so it was untested. It has worked quite well, but I'm probably going to remake it, and when I do, I'll update it in the build below. So, starting off, you don't take the points here. This is where I put like the last filler points. They're good nodes, but path towards glyph, use closer, and the reason we put it here is there's a lot of dex in these rare nodes that can activate the heavy requirements of 40 dex on closer. It's also really nice to have early on, because while wielding a melee weapon, basically always, you have damage reduction. So both for endgame and leveling, this goes here. Progress towards no witnesses. And this node I have allocated, even though it is a bit far. Because the node you can path through here is good. It gives your ultimate extra damage and you extra damage for 20 seconds after your ultimate is up, which will be always because of your CDR, more or less. I have here put efficacy, because it buffs rare nodes within range, and here we have some really good rare nodes, 45% damage and 18% life, both really useful. Might be some better placement for it, but I kinda like it there for now. Progress towards Tricks of the Trade board. I have not selected it because you don't use that many basic skills, and the marksman skill is the basic skill. So this would probably amount to like 5% damage, so not really worth it. Here I've used exploit, standard glyph I guess for almost every class. Causes vulnerable on hit and extra vulnerable damage, which will be multiplicative. Afterwards, progress towards exploit weakness. I have not allocated exploit weakness, although it is really good and it is probably worth the points. It's just that for single target you will get the full multiplier all the time, so it's very good. But on overall content, sometimes you will just kill medium trash, which you hit 5 times, let's say, and it just won't stack up. So if you do like a boss killer role in a group, or you go Lilith push maybe, then yeah, you should pick it. But otherwise, overall, no. So it's a bit borderline, but it can be selected. Here, tracker, one of 2 poison-themed nodes, and unlike the other one, this one doesn't just increase poison damage, it instead increases all your damage against poison targets, in addition to doing a multiplicative duration, which amounts to more damage on your actual poisons. So, very solid glyph. Afterwards, progress towards Eldritch Bounty, which I actually have selected because it is 20% multiplicative damage on your poison imbuement. It's a bit borderline if it's worth it or not, but I felt it is. This is one of the things I really want to change, but I didn't find a more clever way to get it. Maybe path from here instead, but that's also kind of far, so there's no real good solutions to getting it. Anyway, that was about it. So if you have any questions, just ask, and I'll see you next time.